If a single coin could give you wealth, but erase your name from history, would you still take it? In 19th century Kano, three brothers stood at a crossroads. One road led to riches, one led to ruin, and one led to a tree that remembers everything. But when the curse returns, this time wearing a smile, the village must choose. Truth or comfort, memory or myth. Because in a land where stories are power, the one forgotten is the one who paid the highest price. The sun rose like a golden coin over the ancient city of Kano, casting long shadows on the red earth streets. In the heart of the city, a question echoed among elders and young ones alike. What if every man stood at a crossroad, and one path led to wealth while the other to ruin, but both looked the same? Beneath the arched gateway of Cormy Market, three friends stood at the beginning of such a path. Smith, Robert, and Charles, childhood friends bound by dreams but divided by desires. Smith, a broad-shouldered man with coal-dark skin and calloused hands, was known for his loyalty and blunt honesty. Robert, fairer and sharp-eyed, always walked with the air of someone who had secrets tucked under his cap. And Charles, the youngest, often walked barefoot despite his fine robes, a dreamer who loved poetry more than profit. They had all grown in the same dusty courtyard in Sabangari, raised on bowls of tuo and the sound of elders' riddles. But as they stared down the two dusty roads just outside the Dala Hill, their futures began to split. One road, the old fortune seller said, placing his cower-stained fingers over a leather mat, is paved with silver but lined with snakes. The other is bare, but your feet will find peace. Choose. They laughed nervously, thinking it was just a tale, not knowing that their choice would mark the beginning of a story that would haunt generations. The boys walked to the Iroko tree near Kofarmata, their secret meeting place since childhood. Beneath its gnarled roots, they had buried trinkets, carved initials, and shared foolish dreams. This morning, however, the air was heavy with meaning. Charles spoke first, his eyes distant. What if we take the road that brings us riches? All of us, together, will be the envy of Kano. Smith looked at the dust, then at the sky. I do not want riches if it means we forget who we are. Robert leaned forward. Smith, no one forgets a hungry belly. You speak of values, but we can use the wealth to change our fate. They swore an oath, right hand over heart, left hand over the soil, that they would not betray each other no matter what they found on the road. But even the strongest promises crack under the weight of gold. That afternoon, as they prepared for their journey, an old merchant with one eye and a rusted cane stopped them at Jakara Road. His turban was soiled with the dust of 100 cities. 3 boys on the road of riches? I've seen this tale before, he croaked. One returns mad, one returns rich, and one never returns. Robert scoffed, old man tales. We make our own destiny. The merchant's remaining eye narrowed. So did the last 3. He pointed eastward. Beware the city of mirrors. That place shows men their true face. They walked away, but Smith glanced back, unsure whether the road beneath his feet was real or just the start of a tale passed down in whispers and firelight. On the 3rd day of travel, they reached a massive fork in the road. No sign, no map, just silence. Charles squatted to read the ground like the hunters he admired. This path leads through rocky land, but there's a village at the end. That one is smoother, leads to hills. Robert pointed to the smoother path. Hills mean mining. Mining means gold. Smith hesitated. He touched the soil of the rough path. Sometimes the hard road hides what matters. They argued till the sun began to fade. Then, for the first time, they made separate decisions. Charles followed Smith into the thorns. Robert walked alone, eyes on the golden hills. Smith and Charles arrived at a dusty village called Tasharana, where smoke curled from round clay huts, and elders sat like statues by the fires. They were welcomed with millet porridge and silence. An old woman with henned fingers beckoned them. You chose the road of ash. But from ash the Iroko grows. Stay. Learn. Work. Smith nodded. Charles grimaced. We were looking for treasure. Wisdom is treasure, she replied, her eyes clouded. Gold is the bait. This place is your test. They stayed, learning to till, to heal, and to listen. But every night, Charles dreamt of Robert, climbing hills lined with fire and laughter, his hands full of glittering stones. Meanwhile, Robert reached the mining hills. Men with shining eyes and bloodied hands welcomed him. It was a place where laughter had teeth and gold came at the cost of one's soul. He worked quickly, bribing guards, charming traders. Within weeks, he had more gold than he could carry. But the deeper he mined, the darker the tunnels. He heard whispers, saw shadows. Once, he saw his reflection blink when he did not. One night, he met a woman in white at the edge of a quarry. She never spoke, only pointed toward the road he had left. Her eyes were hollow. Her smile was sad. She vanished by dawn. And yet, Robert stayed. He was rich now, but he no longer laughed. Back in Tasharana, Charles grew restless. The rhythm of village life, once peaceful, now felt suffocating. He confronted Smith beneath the moonlit Iroko. Robert must have forgotten us, Charles said bitterly. He has wealth now. He won't return. Smith remained calm. Let him chase gold. We were meant for something else. But when a passing trader brought word of a man dressed in gold controlling an entire mining hill, Charles's curiosity flared again. He began packing. Where are you going? Smith asked. To remind Robert of his oath. Charles walked for 2 days across dry fields and riverbeds. The road was no longer smooth. Thorns grabbed at his robe, and shadows danced where no trees grew. He found the City of Mirrors by accident, a ghost town of glass and stone. Reflections whispered names. His own face looked older. He saw a gold robe trailing behind a rock. He followed. Robert, he called. But only his echo returned. Then he saw it, a figure kneeling before a cracked mirror, sobbing. It was Robert. Charles stood frozen, heart pounding. Robert knelt before the cracked mirror, muttering to himself as if entranced. His robe, once brilliant with golden embroidery, now hung in filthy folds. His fingernails were blackened, and there were fresh scratches on his face, like he had been clawing at something unseen. Robert, Charles said again, stepping cautiously closer. Robert slowly turned. His eyes did not register recognition, only confusion, as if seeing Charles through a veil. I remember this place, he whispered. This mirror told me I was a king. But every time I looked again, my crown turned to bone. Charles dropped to his knees. We took the same oath. You left us. For what? Look at yourself. Robert reached out as if to touch Charles's face, then recoiled. You still have your soul. I traded mine for glitter that won't stop bleeding. Suddenly, the mirror cracked again with a sharp snap. A spiderweb of fractures spread across its surface, and from its base a whisper rose, low, echoing, and in a voice neither of them recognized. One broke the bond. One will bury it. One must choose again. The ground beneath them trembled, and dust fell from the stone walls. Charles grabbed Robert's arm. We need to leave. Now! But Robert stood still, eyes locked on the mirror. It won't let me. A shadow began to stretch across the floor, tall, faceless, and moving without sound. Charles backed away, shouting, Robert, move. But Robert smiled and whispered, It's already inside me. Charles dragged Robert backward, his feet scraping against stone, but Robert's body felt heavier than before, as if something unseen was anchoring him to the floor. The mirror's shards began to vibrate, each one reflecting not their faces, but scenes, fire in the hills, screaming miners, gold melting into black tar. One shard showed Smith, asleep under the Iroko, clutching a carved wooden flute. The shadow on the floor stretched taller. It had no face, no eyes, just the vague outline of a figure cloaked in dust and smoke. It moved not like a man, but like a thought slipping through silence. "Run, Charles," Robert whispered, his voice hollow and far away. "I'm not leaving you again," Charles replied, tightening his grip. Then the shadow spoke, if one could call it speech. It was not words, but a vibration inside Charles's chest, like a drumbeat made of dread. He chose the road of hunger. He must feed it. Robert jerked violently, his eyes rolling upward. His lips parted, and a gold coin slid out from under his tongue, hitting the stone floor with a metallic clink. Charles recoiled. "What is this? What have you done to yourself?" "I paid the toll," Robert murmured. "But I never knew it would collect forever." Suddenly the ground split. Not a large quake, but a narrow chasm, slicing between Robert and Charles. From the crack, more coins spilled upward, as if vomited by the earth. Each one bore Robert's face. Each one bled from its edges. Charles backed away, trembling. The voice echoed again. "Leave now, or pay with the soul still warm." Charles turned to flee, but behind him, the corridor of glass now showed no exit. Every reflection was him, running in opposite directions, except one, who simply stood still and smiled. Far away from the nightmare of mirrors, Smith sat beneath the great Iroko tree in Tasharana. The evening sun cast long golden beams through the branches, making the leaves shimmer like ancient metal. Children played with sticks in the distance, and elders hummed quiet songs by the fire. But Smith's heart was uneasy. He had not seen Charles in weeks. He had heard nothing. The silence pressed against him like a tightening cloth. And now, the village itself had changed, subtle shifts only those who paid attention could sense. The millet grew shorter. The goats refused to bleat at night. And yesterday, the old woman with the henned hands had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only her prayer mat, soaked in dust. That night, as Smith rose to prepare the communal fire, he heard it, a drumbeat. Faint, hollow, no rhythm, just one dull thud every few minutes, coming from behind the hill of ancestors. He approached slowly, torch in hand. The flame flickered violently, though there was no wind. The drumming grew louder, but when he reached the top of the hill, he froze. There was no drummer. Only a single leather drum sitting alone in the clearing, its skin blackened, its base scorched. Yet it thudded, as if a ghost hand struck it every few moments. Carved into its rim were symbols Smith could not read, but somehow recognized. One of them was the same spiral he had seen on the cowrie mat of the fortune seller long ago. Another looked like a mirror. A third was a cracked coin. Smith knelt beside it, dread crawling up his spine. "Charles, what road have you taken?" The drum pulsed again. Louder now, like a heartbeat growing impatient. Suddenly, Smith heard a voice in the wind, a child's whisper from behind the hill. The gold came back, but it brought its shadow. He turned. Nothing was there. Then the torch went out. Smith was alone in the dark, but the drum continued to beat, this time faster. Charles stood frozen in the glass corridor, panting. His real body trembled, but every reflection around him was calm, deliberate, almost taunting. He turned to the left, his image turned right. He raised his hand. His image raised the wrong one. None of them matched him anymore. Except one. One reflection stood perfectly still while Charles moved. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It simply stared back at him with a tight smile, lips curled unnaturally, eyes glowing with something that looked like pity. "Who are you?" Charles hissed. The reflection finally moved, slowly lifting its hand and pointing directly at Charles's chest. "You," it mouthed soundlessly. "But cleaner. But wiser. But alone." Then the glass began to ripple like water. Charles staggered back, but the floor held firm. The smiling reflection stepped out of the mirror like a man stepping through fog. He wore Charles's face, but his robes were untouched by dirt, his eyes unburdened by guilt, and his voice. "Why suffer, Charles?" the copy asked, tone silken. "You followed Smith. You waited. You worked the land. For what? You could have had everything. Charles clenched his fists. Smith is my brother. Robert too. We swore. The oath is broken, the reflection snapped. Robert shattered it. Smith buried it. You have a chance to rewrite it. All you have to do is take my hand. He stretched out a palm. It shimmered with gold dust. The corridor of mirrors trembled again, the air now thick with heat and the coppery tang of something ancient and wrong. Charles stepped forward. And if I don't? The reflection's smile faltered. Then your face stays here, and you walk the world without one. Suddenly, the other reflections shattered in unison with a scream that wasn't human, and Charles felt his own face begin to burn. The next morning, Smith awoke with his clothes soaked in sweat and the taste of ash in his mouth. He had not dreamed, he remembered. The burning drum, the whispering wind, the chilling voice that said the gold had returned with a shadow. And Charles had been gone far too long. Determined, Smith went to the oldest living root in Tasharana, the base of the Iroko tree that had stood for more than a century. The villagers said it was planted by the founder of the village, watered with salt, and protected by a spirit who only spoke in silence. Most were too afraid to go near it after sundown. But Smith knelt before it at dawn. He removed his sandals, laid his carved flute on the earth, and placed his forehead gently against the bark. If there is still a guardian here, I need to know what road I walk. The wind didn't answer, but the ground did. The earth trembled, subtly, rhythmically, as though something deep below was turning over in its sleep. And then a voice echoed, not in the air but in Smith's bones. 3 leaves once grew from the same branch. 1 wilted for hunger. 1 burned for glory. 1 still has a choice. Smith looked up. What choice? The tree creaked. A deep root cracked open, revealing a small hollow space just large enough for 1 man to crawl through. Without hesitation, Smith entered, his back scraping bark, his knees brushing stone. Inside, he found a round chamber lit by veins of glowing amber running through the roots. On the ground lay 3 objects, a stone mirror, half buried in dust, a small gourd wrapped in red string, and a coil of golden thread frayed at the ends. Behind them was a carved symbol, 3 roads branching from 1 base, 1 leading to fire, 1 to thorns, and 1 into mist. As Smith reached for the mirror, the gourd cracked open, and a child's voice echoed. If you look too closely, you'll forget which face is yours. Smith turned the mirror over. His reflection didn't look back. Instead, it whispered, he's waiting. But not for you. Charles stumbled backward, clutching his burning face. The glass corridor around him now wept crimson tears, mirror shards bleeding from their edges, screaming without mouths. And yet, the perfect reflection of him, flawless, golden-robed, cold-eyed, stood calmly in the center, hands still extended. You're unraveling, the double said gently. You have seen too much. If you don't accept me, the world will forget you. You will become a shadow behind your own name. Charles fell to his knees, pain blinding. No, I am Charles, son of Musa. I remember my mother's song, the one she sang while pounding millet. Rain falls twice when you pray and once when you weep. The double crouched, eyes narrowing. Memory doesn't make you real. Choices do. You followed the wrong friend. That tree-hugging idealist, Smith? He will die nameless. You followed his path, and it has led you here. Charles trembled. I followed my heart, even if it brought me to hell. The mirror behind him exploded with light. Out of the shattered glass stepped ghostly figures, images of his childhood. His mother braiding his hair, Smith and Robert sharing laughter over stolen mangoes. The oath beneath the Iroko, hands over hearts. He looked up at his double. You have no soul. Just shine and silence. The reflection's expression darkened. Then you've chosen pain. Charles forced himself to stand, staggering toward the memory shards behind him. As his fingers brushed the image of the oath, the double screamed. Its face melted into 1,000 broken pieces, and the corridor crumbled like a collapsing tomb. Just as the final mirror shattered, a wave of light pulled Charles upward. And he awoke in the middle of a desert he didn't recognize, with gold dust in his eyes and no memory of how he got there, or who he was. Inside the root chamber of the Iroko, the air shifted. It smelled now of wet earth, old sweat, and something older, something like grief wrapped in smoke. Smith stood alone, mirror in one hand, golden thread in the other. The stone walls began to glow with carvings, lines spiraling into ancient Hausa script. Then, without warning, the room began to shift. The roots creaked open into a tunnel, and Smith, clutching the flute around his neck, stepped forward. The tunnel narrowed behind him, sealing the way out. Ahead, a strange fog drifted in, a silver mist that did not feel like air. It whispered names. Smith. Smith, son of no one, brother to none. Smith's fists clenched. Lies. I remember who I am. The fog coalesced into figures. First Robert, golden and smiling, but with black tears on his cheeks. You let me fall. Then Charles appeared, half of his face erased like a forgotten painting. You never came. Smith stepped back. This isn't real. A voice boomed from the walls. To lead others, one must not forget their own name. Speak yours, or be swallowed by the forgotten. The fog thickened. The faces multiplied. Elders from the village, his father with no eyes, the children he had taught. All of them called him different names. Musa, Abdu, Waziri, none were right. Smith dropped to his knees. My name is Smith. My father was Murtala. My mother was Halima of Jiden Magaji. I remember the taste of roasted maize, the sting of cane on my back, the way Charles sang when it rained. The fog screamed. Then it cleared. The stone walls melted away to reveal a vast sky above. He stood in a field of glass Iroko leaves. In the center, a single name was etched into the earth, Smith Ibn Murtala. Guardian. Witness. One who remembers. The flute at his chest glowed faintly. But beside the name was a second carving, fresh and still smoking. Robert Ibn Nothing. Chosen of gold. Bound to break. And the third name was gone.